One of the most unforgettable moments of my life was about to happen as I stood beside my wife, Jessica, in the delivery room of St. Mary's Hospital in Austin, Texas. The doctor was delivering our second child, our first son. The baby's head crowned, and with Jessica's final push and agonized scream, the newborn emerged and was caught by the waiting doctor. The room fell silent almost instantly, save for Jessica's labored breathing. But the stillness wasn't the serene kind I had expected. Instead, it was thick with tension. The doctor and the two nurses didn't seem to be looking at the baby or at Jessica. I noticed their glances flickering toward me. I stood there, frozen, my face behind a surgical mask, my mouth open in disbelief. My heart was racing, and my brain scrambled to understand what I was seeing. It wasn't that there was anything wrong with the baby. Physically, he looked healthy as one of the nurses wiped him clean. But there was one unmistakable detail: the child appeared to have distinctly African American features. Jessica was as Irish as they come, red hair, freckles, and pale skin. And me? I'm about as Eastern European as they come. There was absolutely no chance that either of us had African heritage. The nurse who had cleaned up the baby approached to hand him to me. Instinctively, I stepped back, almost as if she were holding something dangerous. Her expression hardened, and without a word, she turned to Jessica, who had been tidied up by another nurse. The nurse placed the baby on Jessica's chest, and Jessica, her face pale and her lips trembling, kissed the baby softly. The silence in the room deepened. Feeling lightheaded, I scanned the room for a chair, but before I could find one, my knees gave out. I crumpled to the cold hospital floor, fainting on the spot. When I woke up, I found myself lying on a couch at the opposite end of the delivery room. Jessica was sitting up in her hospital bed, holding the baby close. Her lips moved softly, as if she were humming a lullaby, but I couldn't hear the tune over the pounding in my ears. Before I could fully regain my composure, one of the nurses leaned over me, speaking quietly but firmly. "If you're planning to cause a scene, you'd better think twice," she said, her voice sharp. "This is not the time or place." I managed to sit up, rubbing the back of my head where it had hit the floor. "Yes, ma'am," I mumbled, my head spinning. I didn't bother looking at Jessica. Instead, I staggered out of the room, heading straight to the nurse's station. "My name is Ethan Carter," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "My wife just gave birth to a child, and I want to make sure I'm not listed as the father on the birth certificate." The nurse on duty looked startled, but before she could respond, another nurse, older, with short blonde hair, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, we'll handle this as professionally as possible," she said, her tone even but tinged with disapproval. "If you're not biologically the father, your name won't be on the certificate. But we'll need confirmation first. Would you like to take a DNA test now?" "Yes, immediately," I snapped. They escorted me to a small lab down the hall, where a technician swabbed my cheek and assured me the results would be expedited. The walk back to my car was a blur. The warm Texas evening air hit me like a wall, but I barely noticed it. My head was spinning, and my chest felt like it was caving in. Jessica and I had been married for 10 years. We met in college, back when life felt full of endless possibilities. She was 33 now, and I was 34. We had built a life together, a house in a nice Austin suburb, promising careers, and our 3-year-old daughter, Emma, who was the light of my life. But this? This was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. Emma was spending the night with Jessica's parents, which, in hindsight, was a blessing. It meant I could sit in the empty living room with a bottle of bourbon, trying to piece together the shattered remains of my world. The first drink burned on the way down. The second felt a little easier. By the third, my phone buzzed. It was Jessica's mother, Nancy. "Ethan," she began, her voice unusually formal. "I can only imagine what you're thinking right now, but let's be rational about this. I'm sure there's an explanation for everything. An explanation? I laughed bitterly. What explanation could there possibly be, Nancy? Did she forget we're married? Forget she already had a family? There was silence on the other end of the line. Then her voice dropped to a hiss. Don't do anything stupid. I hung up without another word. The next morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented. The sunlight streaming through the window felt like an accusation. The empty bourbon bottle on the table confirmed what I already knew: I wasn't thinking clearly. I called my boss, Mark, to let him know I needed a couple of days off. His cheerful tone when he picked up the phone only made it harder. Ethan. Congrats on the new baby. How's Jessica doing? There was a long pause after I explained. Mark, to his credit, didn't pry. Take all the time you need, he said finally. And if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. After the call, I showered and dressed mechanically, then grabbed my keys. I had no idea what I was going to say when I returned to the hospital, but I knew one thing: I needed answers. Jessica was alone when I walked into her hospital room. The baby was nestled in her arms, nursing quietly. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment before stepping inside. She looked up, her expression a mix of guilt and exhaustion. Ethan, she began softly. I held up a hand to stop her. Don't, I said, my voice low and tight. Don't say anything until you tell me the truth. Who is he? Her lips trembled as she looked away. His name is Ryan Bennett, she admitted. He's my boss. Of course. Ryan Bennett. The hotshot financial consultant Jessica had raved about for months. 30 years old, with a master's degree from Stanford and a reputation as a rising star. How long? I asked, barely able to keep my voice steady. Jessica hesitated, then whispered, a little over a year. A year. My fists clenched at my sides. You've been cheating on me for a year? And now this? I gestured toward the baby, my voice rising. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said, tears streaming down her face. It got out of control. I didn't want to hurt you. Didn't want to hurt me? I laughed bitterly. You've destroyed me, Jessica. Destroyed us. For what? A fling with some self-absorbed kid who probably sees you as a conquest? It wasn't like that, she shot back, her voice breaking. I thought I was in love with him. Thought? I repeated, incredulous. What about now? What about this baby? She didn't answer. As I turned to leave, I nearly collided with someone standing in the doorway. It was Ryan Bennett. The sight of him, tall, well-dressed, and annoyingly confident, ignited something in me. Before I could stop myself, I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the wall. Stay the hell away from my family, I growled through clenched teeth. Ethan, stop! Jessica shouted. Ryan raised his hands in surrender. I'm sorry, he stammered. I didn't mean for this to happen. Didn't mean for this to happen? I shoved him again. You didn't mean to destroy a family? 2 nurses rushed in, pulling us apart. I let go, shoving Ryan back toward the hallway. This isn't over, I warned before storming out of the room. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Jessica and I split custody of Emma, and I agreed to pay child support. The baby, whom she named Liam, was Ryan's responsibility, though I couldn't help but feel a lingering bitterness every time I thought about the boy. Jessica and Ryan married a year later, but their happily ever after didn't last. The cracks began to show within a few years, and by the time Emma was 10, they had separated. The years after the divorce were a whirlwind. I poured myself into raising Emma, ensuring she never felt like she was caught between 2 worlds. Despite my anger at Jessica, I kept things civil for Emma's sake. She didn't deserve the fallout of our mistakes. Jessica and Ryan seemed happy at first. They moved into a large house in one of Austin's upscale neighborhoods, complete with a pool and a home theater. Ryan's career flourished, and Jessica appeared to settle into her role as a stay-at-home mom. But Emma, ever observant, began to notice the cracks. "Mom and Ryan argue a lot," she told me one evening after I picked her up from school. "Sometimes she cries in her room. I think he's not around much." I wanted to comfort her, but what could I say? The truth was, I didn't care what happened to Jessica and Ryan as long as Emma was okay. Meanwhile, my life slowly rebuilt itself. I met new people, explored hobbies I'd neglected, and, most importantly, reconnected with myself. Wednesday evenings at a cozy bar downtown became a ritual for me. That's where I met my two closest friends, Alex and Maddie. Alex, a sharp-witted attorney with a no-nonsense attitude, had a way of cutting through the noise with brutal honesty. Maddie, her partner, was a medical researcher with an easygoing demeanor and a knack for making anyone feel at ease. Together, they were a force of nature, and their friendship became one of the most meaningful parts of my life. One night, as we sat at our usual booth, sipping cocktails and swapping stories, Alex leaned over and fixed me with her trademark stare. "So, Ethan," she began, "when are you going to start dating again? And don't give me that 'I'm too busy' crap." Maddie grinned. "She's right. You've been on your own long enough. It's time to get back out there." I laughed, shaking my head. "You two sound like my mother." "Well, your mother has a point," Alex shot back. "You're 37, for crying out loud. What's the worst that could happen?" I didn't have an answer for her. At their insistence, I reluctantly signed up for a dating app. My first few dates were disasters, awkward silences, mismatched expectations, and one woman who spent the entire evening talking about her cats. But just when I was about to give up, I met Olivia. Olivia was a 34-year-old graphic designer with a quick wit and a smile that could light up a room. Our first date was at a quaint Italian restaurant, where we bonded over our mutual love of classic rock and bad puns. By the end of the evening, I found myself genuinely laughing for the first time in years. Over the next few months, Olivia and I grew closer. She met Emma, and the two hit it off immediately. For the first time since my marriage fell apart, I allowed myself to hope for something real. But just as life seemed to be falling into place, a curveball came hurtling my way. One evening, while Olivia and I were out for dinner, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jessica, "We need to talk. It's about Ryan." I frowned, my stomach sinking. Jessica rarely reached out to me unless it was about Emma. "Everything okay?" Olivia asked, noticing my expression. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "It's Jessica. Something about Ryan." Olivia nodded, her expression understanding. "Go. I'll call you later." I left the restaurant and drove to Jessica's house. She met me at the door, her face pale and drawn. "Come in," she said quietly. We sat in the living room, the tension thick in the air. Finally, she spoke. "Ryan. He's been cheating on me," she said, her voice trembling. "For years, apparently. And the woman, she's pregnant." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. "Jessica," I said slowly, "I don't know what you expect me to do with this information." She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. I didn't know who else to tell. "I feel so stupid, Ethan. After everything I did to you," her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. For a moment, I sat there, unsure of what to say. Then I sighed and leaned forward. "Jessica, I'm not going to pretend I've forgiven you for what happened. But I know how it feels to have your world ripped apart. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even you. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with surprise. You don't deserve this, I continued. Nobody does. Jessica and I sat in silence for a while after I said my piece. She was visibly shaken, and despite everything that had happened between us, I couldn't help but feel a pang of empathy. Thanks, Ethan, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't deserve your kindness, but, thank you. Kindness isn't the same as forgiveness, I replied, my tone measured. But I know what it's like to feel like your life is crumbling. You'll get through this, Jessica, but you need to figure out what's next, for you and for the kids. Her tears fell silently as she nodded. Over the next few weeks, Jessica's world unraveled. Ryan, true to form, showed little remorse for his actions. He moved out of the house to be with his pregnant mistress, leaving Jessica to pick up the pieces. Emma, now 10, was old enough to sense the tension. I did my best to shield her from the worst of it, but Jessica and I had to coordinate more closely than we had in years to ensure Emma felt safe and loved. In a strange twist of fate, Jessica began leaning on me for support. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but it was a reminder of the bond we had once shared. Meanwhile, my relationship with Olivia was thriving. She was a steady presence in my life, and her warmth and humor made the chaos of the past seem distant. Emma adored her, and even Jessica seemed to appreciate how good Olivia was for me. One evening, as Olivia and I sat on my couch, she turned to me with a curious expression. Have you ever thought about what you'd do if Jessica wanted to get back together? She asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. She hasn't said anything like that, I began, choosing my words carefully. But I don't know. It's complicated. She was my first love, and we share a lot of history, but after everything that happened, Olivia nodded, her expression thoughtful. I get it. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what happens. Her reassurance was a balm to my soul, but it also left me with a nagging question. Could I truly move forward if a part of me was still tied to the past? Jessica's healing process was slow but steady. She started attending therapy, focusing on rebuilding her life and figuring out who she was outside of her relationships. We began to communicate more openly, not about the past, but about Emma and our shared hopes for her future. One Saturday afternoon, as we watched Emma play soccer, Jessica turned to me. I've been thinking a lot about us lately, she said. Us? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, Ethan, but I miss what we had. I know it's probably too late, but I thought you should know. Her words hung in the air, heavy with vulnerability. I didn't answer her right away. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. My relationship with Olivia was solid, but Jessica's confession stirred feelings I hadn't fully confronted. Later that evening, I called Alex and Maddie. I need advice, I said as soon as Alex picked up. Oh, this should be good, she teased. What's going on, Romeo? I explained everything, from Jessica's recent struggles to her confession at the soccer game. When I finished, Alex let out a long sigh. Ethan, you're in a tough spot, she said. But you need to be honest with yourself, and with Olivia. If there's even a part of you that's considering going back to Jessica, you owe it to Olivia to tell her. Maddie chimed in. And don't let guilt make the decision for you. Whatever you choose, make sure it's what you really want. The next day, I sat down with Olivia. She listened quietly as I told her about my conversation with Jessica. I don't want to hurt you, I said, my voice heavy with emotion. But I need time to figure this out. Olivia's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she nodded. I understand, Ethan. Just be honest with me, okay? No matter what happens. For weeks, I wrestled with the decision. On one hand, Jessica and I had shared a life and a history that couldn't be erased. On the other, Olivia represented a fresh start, a chance to leave the past behind and build something new. In the end, it was Emma who helped me see things clearly. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she asked, "Dad, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know," I admitted. "Well, I think you should do whatever makes you happy," she said simply. Emma's words stayed with me. Happiness, something so simple, yet so elusive. I had spent years chasing stability, trying to piece together a life that felt whole again. But was I truly happy? I decided to confront the question head-on. A week later, I called Jessica. "Can we talk?" I asked. She hesitated. "Of course." We met at a quiet cafe, away from the distractions of daily life. As we sat across from each other, I took a deep breath. "Jessica, I need to understand something," I began. "Why now? Why, after all these years, do you want to rebuild something you were willing to throw away?" She looked down at her coffee cup, her fingers tracing the rim. "I've had a lot of time to think," she said softly. "Losing Ryan made me realize how much I took for granted. With you, I felt safe, loved, understood. I didn't realize how rare that was until I lost it." Her voice cracked, and she looked up at me, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know I can't undo what I did, Ethan. But I'd give anything for a second chance to make things right." Her words were raw, honest, and full of regret. But were they enough? That evening, I went to Olivia's apartment. She greeted me with a tentative smile, as if she already knew what I was going to say. "Olivia, I don't think I can give you what you deserve," I said, my heart heavy. "You've been incredible to me and Emma, but part of me is still tied to the past. It's not fair to you." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I knew this might happen," she admitted. "And as much as it hurts, I respect you for being honest." We hugged, and for a moment, I felt the weight of my decision pressing down on me. But deep down, I knew it was the right choice, for both of us. With Olivia out of the picture, I turned my attention to Jessica. If I was going to give her a second chance, I needed to make sure we were starting on solid ground. We began with counseling, something we had never tried during our marriage. The sessions were intense, forcing us to confront years of resentment, miscommunication, and pain. There were moments when it felt impossible, when old wounds threatened to tear us apart all over again. But little by little, we began to rebuild trust. Jessica also made an effort to reconnect with Emma. Their relationship had suffered during her time with Ryan, but Jessica was determined to make amends. She attended Emma's soccer games, helped her with school projects, and spent time simply listening. Emma, to her credit, was open-hearted and willing to forgive. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Jessica and I sat on the porch, watching the fireflies dance in the warm Texas air. "Do you think we can ever really fix this?" she asked quietly. I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I don't think we can go back to what we had," I said honestly. "But maybe we can build something new, something stronger." She smiled, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "I'd like that." A year later, we remarried in a small ceremony at a local park. It wasn't flashy or grand, but it was perfect for us. Emma stood by our sides, beaming with pride, while a few close friends, including Alex and Maddie, cheered us on. Life wasn't magically perfect after that. We still had our struggles, our moments of doubt. But this time, we faced them together. Jessica was more present, more engaged, and more committed than she had ever been. And I, for the first time in years, allowed myself to trust again. Emma thrived in the stability of our rebuilt family, and even Liam, now part of our extended family, grew close to me in ways I never expected. As for me, I finally found the happiness Emma had asked about all those months ago. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, it was in the quiet moments, cooking dinner together, cheering at Emma's soccer games, or sitting on the porch with Jessica, watching the fireflies. Looking back, I realized that life doesn't always follow the path we expect. Sometimes, it takes a detour through pain, loss, and heartache to find the things that truly matter. Because happiness isn't about perfection. It's about finding joy in the imperfect, the messy, and the real.